all know as well as I do, can you hear me? I'm not getting anything on the speakers in here. You all know as well as I do that no one can come in until the shielding is back in place. That will take 5 minutes and 36 seconds. How long do I have left? A minute? More? I should be angry. I don't know why I'm not. I should be simply incandescent at myself for going in without confirming that the door between the two chambers was shut. And may I say, for everyone's benefit, it doesn't matter who left the door open. It doesn't matter whether it was a mistake or an equipment malfunction. We are dealing, after all, with something from another planet. It's easy enough to become lost in the wonder of it and forget our checklists. I don't blame any of you. I blame myself, but not with anger. Starting to feel it now. Headache, dizziness, lethargy, as befits a dead man walking. Now a dead man sitting, that's better. Now a dead man sipping coffee from the travel mug that Dr. Mackinac gave me when he came back from that MIT talk. It's my favorite mug, Jim, in case I haven't said it. And I appreciate you dragging it all the way back to the desert for me. I suppose I'd better say something profound if these are my last words. I suppose I'd better state for the record that no, despite the dangers, despite our discovery of the creature's properties, despite our inadequate knowledge of the suits and the shielding and the chambers, I never expected something like this to happen. I did expect to die in my bed as a very, very old man with 1,000 papers behind me. Whether this is a loss for science or not, I can't say. I think it would be the pinnacle of ego to say so. But I'm truly disappointed with how long I got. I will leave all this behind, and I'm not ready. All this, the creature, the lab, my colleagues, my friends, my graduate students, Matt, Allison, I will leave you behind. I am sorry. You know, when I was a kid, I wasn't good at anything really. My grades weren't great. I was a daydreamer. I couldn't run, no good at football or baseball, all the things my old man excelled at. House full of trophies and photos. He met my mother at a baseball game in college. His skills are the reason I exist. I only wanted to be outside, catching bugs and studying them under the cheap dissecting scope my aunt bought me. She was a good sport about kids not being what they were expected to be. And then it seems like a blink between unwrapping that box and being here in the dunes, like no time passed at all, or passed too quickly to perceive. It's moving around in there. I think it's curious about me. What did that flash do? It's thinking, maybe. It must be something very different in its ordinary habitat, where it would never encounter anything as fragile as a human body. Oh, the shielding's almost closed. That was my last glimpse. I'm sure I don't need to say this, but I would be grateful if one of you would adopt Charm. There's a new bag of food in my kitchen pantry and 2 boxes of litter in the coat closet. She's so old, she'd have a hard time at a shelter. I don't think anyone would want her. And she won't know what happened to me so suddenly. She didn't have time to smell me getting sick like Elizabeth, and then the long, slow decline. Or if you can't take her, please find her a good home with someone quiet and predictable. The pain is starting to show up. Interesting delay. We did predict that would happen with deltas. Whoever gets to autopsy me, congratulations. This really will be a first in the literature if you're allowed to publish. Imagine yourself happy. Imagine yourself not rich or famous, or crossing the stage to accept your Nobel like you're a god being handed the golden disk of the sun to look after. But imagine yourself waking up in the morning, feeling proud of what you do, excited to come here, to be with your friends, to study something no one else has ever seen before. Imagine yourself feeling real pleasure, even as your body begins to turn out the lights. One last sip of coffee, still hot. Recording ends at 10:05 a.m.
We didn't plan to be morbid, but my reading from The Blue Beautiful World is also a bit about death. The memory dream began as it always did, with a sweetness, a heaviness, as if the universe itself were sorry and trying its best to be kind. But it also felt like the kindness of a vaccination needle to a small child. You will not understand why I'm doing this. You cannot. This is going to hurt. This is also for your own good. Kanoa found that his main emotional response to the kind cruelty of the universe was resentment and a strong desire to be left alone. For now, he would enjoy the good bits. He would appreciate that glimpse of the best of home, the gritty, pale sand under his feet, gleaming of sea foam and darker gray streaks of volcanic material. The green land behind him, playful yet majestic, with high hills, deep-cut streams rushing into small waterfalls, and the heady scent of the night's light rains on wind-bruised greenery and rich, dark earth. The salt breeze in intermittent puffs like shy kisses, telling a lie of warmth that the sea would soon dispel. And his father, standing with feet wide and arms akimbo, grinning at the ocean as cheerfully as if he were personally responsible for the glorious star of the day and the beauty of all nature. Come, boy, you'll age like a raisin if you don't do this, locked in your VR gear half the day. You'll shrivel up. We're moving about all the time, Kanoa protested tiredly. He yawned. Not only was it still too early in the morning, but the argument was old and repetitive. His father was convinced that something about the use of virtual reality made both brain and body atrophy, like a caged animal in a zoo habitat designed to be adequately stimulating, but nevertheless finite. The remedy was the wide world, the real world, the raw, as designers called it, and his father applied that remedy diligently. Every morning, their ritual was the same. Walk to the beach, give and take a little teasing about the limitations of technology, then swim past the breakers and out into the merciless ocean for a 4 or 5 kilometer stretch to the other side of the curving bay. In spite of the breeze, the waters beyond were calm, and Kanoa soon found himself in that smooth, steady swimming action his father called strolling. Even breathing, long stretch, relax into each surge and rise with every swell. So hypnotic, he almost found himself drifting off again into a kind of moving meditation. He almost forgot to listen for the parallel splash of his father's progress beside him, but it registered nonetheless as a strangeness, a distressing absence that shook him to full awareness. He stopped, alone, looked around, alone, looked back. His father was floating some 20 meters away, mercifully face up, with his lips pouting and labored breathing. Kanoa sprinted to close the distance and immediately positioned himself behind his father's head, one arm across his chest, supporting him and cradling him close. His father laughed weakly. A little discomfort, it'll pass. Then he turned his head to the side, convulsed and retched a little into the water. Kanoa gripped him more tightly as a swell rush washed over them. I've got you, Kanoa said, forcing all hint of fear from his voice as he raised his wrist to activate his emergency beacon. They'll come for us soon. Hang on. No, wait. His father's voice was soft and sleepy, his eyes half closed, but he smiled. Don't stress. It's a good death. Can't complain. In that moment, Kanoa knew that he had fallen asleep again, or had never woken up and was dreaming about swimming at dawn with his father. Because at no time in the real world would his father be dying while the ocean surged around them. And only in a dream would the horizon grow higher like a rogue wave, while the water around them turned gray and dark, yet mildly turbulent like waves over shoals. Only in a dream would the ocean stop behaving naturally and turn into a badly rendered VR mock-up, something too bad to be even a placeholder mid-design. He did not panic. The brush of water against his skin, familiar as breathing, became a tickle of seaweed, then a numbing tingle that took away all chance of panic. His arms slackened and his father's body slipped away from him. The gently churning waters parted them, and then he could not think or feel anything. That morning, when he came to his senses again, he had found himself in the shallows of the bay with many hands around him and under him, brothers, sisters, friends, bearing up his slack body. His mother's face hovered over him, and her hands cradled his head. "Where is your father?" It had not been a question, but a wail. She already knew. "Gone," he murmured, as he rose from slumber into the bright sunrise, the chilly water, the urgent hold of his family. "He's gone." Then the dream deviated from memory, as it always did. Unseen by anyone but him, his father appeared on the beach, looked down at him, poker-faced, and said laconically, "Get up, Kanoa, you're going to be late." Everyone else vanished. The beach was deserted, except for the two of them, standing facing each other, heavy silence between them. "Goodbye," his father said at last, before turning away and walking into the sea. Thank you.
Okay, my first question springs from the editorial vision of Nalo Hopkinson, a Caribbean-Canadian author quite familiar to Bocas Litfest audiences in the past. She edited an anthology published in 2020 called Whispers from the Cotton Tree Root, a fabulous anthology is what she called it, that brought in a range of Caribbean writers doing speculative work, authors we might not expect, that I think showed the long storied tradition that's rich in Caribbean literature of speculative writing. And so I'll quote from the introduction. "I did gather a body of work that I think conveys from a Caribbean worldview that disorienting sense of when events take you to a place that dips into archetype and otherworldliness," end quote. Could you please share with us how each of your books under discussion today, or your writing in general, takes the reader on that particular journey? How through the particular blend of genres that you write in, you map that territory or create it. And you can have an expansive idea of Caribbean as you like. I'll start with you, Karen. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Akilah. I have to say that when you ask how we do it for the reader, I think that that is actually the fundamental ground that I come from. I honestly feel that our experience of life and living in the Caribbean is very much one of almost like walking in dual worlds or in several worlds. And yes, you have the sort of the Western contemporary culture that has a very sort of strict line between what's realist and what isn't. But we are accustomed to our dreaming, and we are accustomed to our ancestors speaking to us, and we're accustomed to the feel of places and all these things that we may or may not tell our overseas friends just in case they think we might need to be, sectioned or medicated. But the truth is, this is our reality already, this blended reality, and that's what I bring into the books. As a matter of course, I would have to make an effort to strip it out rather than make an effort to put it in.
Yeah, I guess being a member of the diaspora, my answer is a bit different. Growing up, I guess, because the primary mission of my parents, who had come to Canada in 1975 when they had their kids, was for us to assimilate as fully as we possibly could given our appearance and our names. They said, the closest proximity you could get to Westernness would be how we would all survive in this new world. So I guess my literature is a much more calculated and autodidactic thing after having taught myself to write based on the literature of the fantastic or the literature of the imagination, fantasy and science fiction and horror. It was all components that I took from the writers I liked and placed into my own work as a kind of experiment. So what would stay the same as the world in which I lived, this very, 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 where I grew up, I was the only person of color for several years in my elementary school. This very, very, very white, westernized, Aristotelian literature, what could be controlled in that? And then what would be a variable would be whatever fantastic element I chose. So yeah, for me it's work.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, and makes an interesting path into my next question, because it's about the concept of progress that we have that is very Western. The idea of a progressive, futuristic society is usually one that's seen as scientifically advanced, and because of that, it's required that there is an absence of any kind of religion, any kind of spirituality, or any kind of religiosity in any aspect of life. But that's not the case in either of your works at all. Whether it's like in your cosmic horror, where the humans' technology is overwhelmed by beings according to their own understanding, they see as gods, or perhaps in societies where there isn't a hard border between either of those knowledge systems, because the spiritual is also another way of knowing our world. So could you please share with us examples of how that informs your work and why that appears in it? Yeah.
So immediately I'm thinking of that saying, I'm sure many of you have heard before, that magic is basically science that you haven't figured out how it works yet. And I would say that in many respects, spirituality is also knowledge that you haven't fully figured out yet. We have our five senses. That's what we're operating with. That's how we've, approached the world, understood the world, compartmentalized the world. Understand that these things are from the human perception, from the human perspective, and most of all from our individual cultural worldviews. And then you appreciate that it's incredible arrogance to assume that this is the only way of seeing things, far less the correct way of seeing things. So, hang on a second, I've talked myself out of fully forgetting the question. The spirituality blending and things. So the idea of progress, see, I got there. So the idea of progress does in fact seem to tie to that, because by compartmentalizing things, by assuming that there are processes and you follow the processes and you get results, you can also have this idea of things marching on. But I think that sometimes when we think of progress, we forget that there are ways in which we can progress biologically in terms of how we evolve. And sometimes evolving is not about becoming, quote unquote, a higher being. It can just be about becoming a different being. But then there are ways in which, as a collective, we evolve, which is part of what's in my book. I'm very excited at the idea that, in the same way how they've all got these discoveries about, what your gut biome is doing, and how your body is actually, several different organisms kind of working together in various ways, even to affect your mood and what have you. I'm like, what does it look like if we were all part of some kind of collective like that, where maybe there's a collective intelligence that we're not even quite aware of, that is consisting of our individual intelligences and activities and so forth. So I do feel that even beyond fiction, we have to be expansive in our concept of what is and also of what could be.
Okay, so that was such an interesting answer, and it touches on one of the things I was going to talk about as well. I mean, the role of religion in my stories tends to be, when I think about religion, so first of all, my mom is Hindu, my dad is Muslim. They sent me to Catholic school for 12 years. I have no idea what they thought was going to happen in terms of my belief system. I ended up agnostic, in case that helps, with 2 science degrees. But it does make me think about, the divisions that we put in genre, like the artificial divisions that we put. Is something fantasy? Is something science fiction? If you have magic in the future, is your book fantasy or science fiction? If you have religion and gods in a book that is set in the future with advanced technology, is that fantasy or science fiction? I tend to think of these as problems for the marketing department, not for me. Because we've had these conversations. They're very boring conversations. But I tend to think of the dual roles that we expect religion to play, personally or in society. And one of them is to kind of collectivize our values and our morals and our ethics and the way we expect people to behave and why. So that's part of it. And then the second is this very human yearning for a personal connection with the divine. And I don't think that's ever anything humanity is going to lose. And when we talk about evolution, so I'm actually reading The Blue Beautiful World right now. I'm about halfway through, so no spoilers. Nobody put up your hand and give me a spoiler. But it does make me think of that kind of spiritual, personal, and religious evolution, which does not bring you into, like you said, a higher state of being. It brings you into a better fit with your environment. And the fit depends on what your environment is doing. So that's what I try to do in my stories as well, is show, particularly in a story like, for example, Willing, where the gods are visible, they walk around, you can see them. It's not a matter of belief. You don't have to decide for yourself, do I believe in the gods or not? Do I believe in their abilities or not? Their abilities are visual. That you can see exactly what happens when you don't obey them. There are consequences everywhere. So that brings up the question in this whole visible gods universe, what is belief? Why do we have it? What does belief become if we happen to know that there are these deities out there? So I like to think that my stories present the questions but don't answer them, because I think that's more interesting.
Well, picking up on your point about the way we expect people to behave, in both of your books, power and control is a major theme. For example, in No One Will Come Back for Us, there are characters who often lose control of their bodies to mysterious forces, but also in the more mundane reality of a disabled child who often does not feel in control of their own body at all. And then in The Blue Beautiful World, there's a character who faces the danger of becoming an oppressive power, but also, to your idea of collectivity, there is a surrendering also of an individualistic idea of existence to a shared one, which involves some surrendering of that idea of power. So what do your books have to say about how we understand and engage with power structures on several levels? Yeah.
Anytime I get asked a question about power, the theme of power in my books, I'm like, okay, calm down. You only have a few minutes. Don't take the bit between your teeth and go along with this. But I feel fundamentally as a Caribbean writer to not discuss the use of power in your books is like, how do you manage not to? We kind of live and breathe this every day. And ultimately, for me, it comes down to, two things really. People talk a lot about trust. Trust and power kind of go hand in hand. It's easy to hand over trust, to hand over control to make yourself vulnerable to someone who you trust. But what is trust really? Trust assumes stability. It assumes the person you're handing over to is going to continue in that state of being someone who's not going to cause you harm, being someone who's only going to bring you good. We all know that's not reality. So sometimes I've found myself examining, I should point out that my background involves not just science but diplomacy and sociology. So I've been bringing examples in the real world and thinking, first of all, do we have structures and systems that don't require trust? Why should there be trust at all? How do we find ways to have our checks and balances almost like separate from the how do you feel about this person or what are you willing to give up? So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect, which comes from research in general, is triangulation. I might think I'm making the best possible decision in the world, but when you have a good friend who's like, hold on and wait a minute, you have probably not thought that one through. suddenly you realize how powerful the collective can be when you have like a group of people who can basically say, you know, maybe not this time. And not only that, the groups need to be shifting. If there's one thing I hope I've put into the Blue Beautiful world is that we don't just have one group of people checking each other, because even a single group can become sort of a one voice kind of, we're all united in this and we're all going to kind of enable each other in various bad behaviors. But when you as an individual belong to different groups, then you have another set of triangulation where one group tells you this is a good idea, the other group tells you think it through, and maybe a third group says, oh, well, there's another path C if you're curious. Then that again allows us to use what power we have in responsible ways. I'm sorry, I did say I was going to try and rein back a bit and I went too far. But if we keep thinking about these things not just as individuals, I think that the idea of how best to deal with power then seeps into our structures and our society as well. And we do have to keep thinking about it, because even when we are in someone else's power, losing control of someone else, we are still exerting power or controlling some other person. And no one escapes from the responsibility of figuring out exactly how they're going to do this right.
So this is a very interesting question. I don't think I've ever written a story that wasn't deliberately and calculatedly about power dynamics. Because, so Salman Rushdie, I think, put it better than me, but he said, you know, we've got this very, again, Western idea in literature that the autonomy and agency of the character is the most important thing. You have to have active characters who are driving the plot. When you look around actually at our lives, at our worlds, at us as human beings, not as characters, we really don't have that. All of our choices are very, very constrained. You know, we work within the systems we work in, and everything from the jobs that we do to the way we get to work, to what we're able to eat, to where we're able to live, all of those choices have been made for us by the circumstances of our birth and upbringing, generally. And I find myself always thinking about that to a very irritating degree. And so you end up with stories where all the doors of agency have been shut to various characters until finally they found that the powers that be have put them into a room, and now they have to enact their story within this room. And I keep coming back to power as such an essential thing in my stories, because I want people to read the story and say, oh, what a passive character, what a, you know, they're not doing anything. They're just making decisions. Well, choosing to do nothing is a choice also. And it also lets us examine the structures that put them in that room. And it's the structures I want people to look at and to be bothered by and to consider and to ask ourselves why historically, why for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, maybe all of human history, we've always had people who would rather have power than anything else. They would give up money, literally, love, leisure time, freedom, conveniences, luxury, comfort. They would give up all of that. They would rather have power. And then we have to ask ourselves, power over what? Power over who? And why? And why is it so important to them personally to be able to tell people what to do and to be able to control the consequences? So again, fiction's a good place to investigate that, because if we try to do it in real life, we get arrested.
Hang on. Before you go to the next question, you said something earlier just now that made me just realize that we know we were kind of, sort of saying the Western idea of agency and what have you. Doesn't it then seem to me as if we basically interrogate the whole question of what makes a hero?
Yes.
When we're dealing with this. And this is important because even beyond the whole idea of whether or not a character has agency, the question of who is a hero. And by a hero, I do not necessarily mean a good guy, because we do have our tragic heroes and our flawed heroes and whatever, but just in terms of who do you see as pulling the central focus of the story. And when you're writing a story where you're almost saying, I refuse to have a central focus, I refuse the concept of a hero, that's something that for some readers is really a challenge, but I want them to be able to get there.
Yeah, and it is such a challenge because readers have been trained by centuries of exactly the same type of literature produced by exactly the same type of editors and presses. So when you get something like The Beautiful World that has multiple heroic arcs, or let's say multiple protagonist arcs, or something like Simon Jimenez's The Vanished Birds, which is one of the best examples I can think of having multiple equally important heroic arcs. Some readers see that and they're like, bleh, this isn't what I was trained to expect and enjoy. How dare you?
And I have to bring in Cadwell Turnbull's Convergent Saga into that discussion as well as a book, a speculative series that multiple protagonist arcs. It is really fantastic. But before I continue, I'd like to open the floor to the audience if they have any questions. I have tons more. No worries there. But just in case there's anyone who has questions to ask or comments, you can approach the staff member there.
You mentioned, Karen, the collective consciousness. And I was thinking that really one of the things that drives speculative fiction is actually really the collective unconscious, where all those universal myths reside. And I'm just wondering whether you would like to comment on that.
The collective unconscious. So, when you talk about collective unconscious, the first thing I think about, aren't we looking perhaps more at a lack of communication? Because sometimes consciousness is mostly about whether you are able to communicate your existence to something else on the outside.
Yeah. Well, actually, perhaps I could ground it in Premee's statement about that longing that we all have to sort of make connection with the divine. That would be one example of the collective unconscious.
I have another one in case anyone's interested. The first thing I thought of was J.G. Ballard's The Drowned World, where as everything falls apart, everyone starts to become subjected to this collective unconsciousness and people start to regress and everyone remembers the same thing. I think I read that book a little too young, but that was the first example I thought of, and that is a great sci-fi example.
I think sci-fi in general, one of the things that it does do for us is it allows us to think of the possibility of other types of thinking beyond the human type. And because it's made up, it's really us finding a new filter to examine how we think. But yeah, I'm kind of glad you raised that because there are people still out there who think that science fiction is a very trivial genre, and trust me, it is not. we are dealing with deep concepts of what does it mean to be human. That question is really completely part of the foundation of science fiction.
Any more questions?
Question to the writers in the front of the stage. Do any of you guys read manga? Question.
Do any of us read manga? Is that the question?
Yes.
I read manga. I love manga and manhwas and webtoons and I'm Your Woman, yeah.
Have you heard of the manga Beastars? By Paul Intercati.
I'm not hearing. Could you stand up and like help us like see you so we can lip read a bit as well?
Have you heard of the manga Beastars?
Oh, Beastars.
Yeah.
I haven't read that one. My friends have, but unfortunately that title has missed me. So sorry.
Wait a minute, were you going to tell us something about V-Stars?
Yeah, you can share.
You can't just
regardless.
like, drop that in and then go away.
I have a question. Did you all always know all you wanted to be writers? Or, like,
No.
how did you know you wanted to become one?
I actually have a slightly different answer. So when I was in school, I said to a friend of mine, I'm going to be a writer, but I have to live a little first so I'll have something to write about. So I took a few decades doing that, and my first published work was basically was 2010, and I was born in 1968. So you understand how long it took for me to get to that point.
Please tell me your skincare routine. Sorry. No, I always wanted to be a scientist. I was like 6 years old and at my parents' parties and telling people, I'm going to be an epidemiologist. And they're like, aren't you like 6? I'm like, well, later I'm going to be an epidemiologist. Obviously, I'm not going to be an epidemiologist when I'm 6. I wanted to be an epidemiologist or a microbiologist. I ended up getting degrees in genetics and then environmental science. And I've worked in science for about 22 years. Writing was always just a hobby. So I did it because I liked it and it made me happy. And it was the thing that I did that made me happiest. So, I had friends who were like, I like playing video games, or I like playing tennis, or I like to swim. And I was like, well, I don't trust the ocean for one thing. But like, writing is my hobby. Writing's what I like to do. And so I didn't really tell anybody that that was my hobby. And so when I got my first book deal in 2018, the universal response from family and friends was like, what? You write books? You wrote a book? You've written multiple books? What is happening? So yeah, I guess I decided a little late to seek publication, but I've always written. It just didn't seem that publishing it was the point.
Now I feel guilty. I have to say that my situation is probably a bit more like hers, because I thought of writing as a hobby as well. I was also pursuing a degree in physics and history of science technology, and later went on to doing things like science technology policy, diplomacy in IT, and sociology. But what happened was that my first novel, the manuscript, won a prize. And we were in the middle of the Great Recession. And I was like, oh, this is a way to make money. So at that point I was like, because a lot of West Indian parents, I hope they've changed a bit now, the idea of being a writer is like a no-no. It's like, that's not a stable job, come on, what are you talking about? So I was able to go to my father, because even at that advanced stage, you go to your father and you say, I think I need to try this a bit. They seem to think I might be good, so maybe I should make an effort at this. But I had no formal training in English. I want to point that out. A lot of writers that I know have zero formal degrees or whatever in English, no MFA, no whatever. You don't have to have that, but you do have to. Yes, I don't check. But you do have to be an expansive reader, read a lot. You do have to try to write and be prepared to suck. If you are not prepared for your initial writings to be really, really bad, to accept that, to think through why they're bad and keep practicing so you get better. If you can't because none of us is a genius at first stroke, right? It doesn't happen. But yes, a lot of it was becoming a professional writer because it became the thing that brought in money. So that's my admission.
Do we have time for one more question? Yes.
Okay, yeah, ever make a book and just think, if I'm to post this, people think I'm crazy? Okay, if I get that feeling.
Sorry, can you stand up again? A little lip reading helps us.
Yeah, if I get that feeling, and if I'm to post a certain book, people might think I'm crazy, like I've gone nuts. Because I get that feeling a bit. And if I tell somebody about one of my books, I just feel a bit crazy.
I'm hearing pieces of your question, something about your concern about if you write a particular type of book that people will think you're mad?
Yes.
Oh, well.
Reviewers think all sorts of things. It's fine.
If it is fiction, it is fiction. If the publisher thinks or the agent thinks that, you've really gone beyond, they will not allow you to go further. If you are practicing elements of your book in real life, that would be a matter for your doctor.
All right, time for one final question, and that will be the last one.
Oh, Lord. Hi, everybody. Good morning. So, as both very prolific and very well-reviewed and awarded writers, one of the things that's particularly significant to me, and I've had these conversations with you previously, but for everybody else's edification, the matter of how do you make your work both palatable to the wider world in terms of making sure that they understand what the Caribbeanness is, of our work, while also being genuinely authentic to Caribbean readers. And how do you bridge those things in a way where, let's be honest, people who have no idea about how to find the Caribbean on a map can still understand what is true and real about the Caribbean experiences of your work without feeling like you're watering it down for everybody else?
Yeah, my answer is going to be brief. Again, I guess as a diaspora writer, I'm not doing it on purpose. And when you talk about palatability, that's an interesting question too. So afterwards, we're going out and you're going to buy me a drink and we're going to talk about literary palatability. But yeah, I think my answer is we don't know. I just do whatever I want, and then my editor says, please don't do that again.
The expression on my face is because Brandon and I have had this conversation before, and I have said, we are the mainstream. I'm in my mainstream. I have a local editor who is able to filter out the difference between I'm actually doing nonsense and there's something uniquely Caribbean. Then it will go to the outside editor who will explain if they don't know what's going on. But ultimately, when I'm drafting a book, I can't be thinking about everybody else in the world. I gotta be thinking about me first. And once you finish thinking about you and finish the draft, then you start worrying about the rest of it.
Thank you so much for the audience questions. That was excellent. Yeah. So please remember that the writers and speakers from this session will be available to sign their books at the designated book signing table outside. So please give them a couple of minutes to move to the book signing table. Also, books by the festival writers in general are available from the booksellers in the library atrium. Our next event back here in the old fire station building is at 1 p.m., a Fantastic Friday one-on-one between author Irenesen Okoje and the fantastic writer Brandon O'Brien. So please come back and be here for that session. Another round of applause for our writers. This is an excellent opener.